All right, so this is a very exciting update that we have seen. Joining us here today is Rick Needham. He is the Chief Commercial Officer for Commonwealth Fusion Systems, or we're going to refer to it as CFS for the sake of making things easier to discuss. It wasn't that long ago, you folks announced something pretty big. You're wanting to create the world's first commercial fusion power plant in Virginia. That's a big order to fill.
It is a big order, and we're super excited about having made this decision about where the first grid scale fusion power plant will be, and all of the work that we did to make that happen, but including work with partners, with collaborators, the state of Virginia, the local Chesterfield County, and with Dominion, who we've also signed a kind of an agreement with as well. But it's a important step, one of many, towards bringing fusion power to the grid.
And we're going to dive a little bit more into it. I just want to make sure we talk a little bit about you because you are the, again, Chief Commercial Officer. But just quick highlights that I grabbed from your LinkedIn. You've got 30 years of experience as an operator and investor. You also have experience as a submarine officer in the United States Navy. Thank you for your service to our country. You've also had training on nuclear plant design and operation. Plus, you also worked in energy and sustainability. You're a leader there at Google, and you went to Harvard Business School. So you kind of know what you're talking about when it comes to the subject matter.
Well, I appreciate the comment there. Um, yeah, I think I've worked in technology development and operations, strategy, investing. My role just before coming to the CFS was as a growth equity investor at TBG in their biggest impact fund and then the Rise Climate Fund. So I'd like to tell people my career has been, I'd say, nonlinear, uh, but it has all, in some sense, with this last role I'm in now, kind of tied all of that together to trying to come up with what we think is the power solution for the future that could really, become the dominant driver of how we power our systems in the world, electricity, heat, others. But fusion has all these natural positive attributes that make it really an ideal power source if we can get it to work, and that's what we're working on.
If you can get it to work, which is why I wanted to ask if you could respond to some people who may be skeptical. We've heard some other companies that are trying to be the world's first, some that come to mind. I think Zap Energy is one of them. Helion is also working on its nuclear fusion endeavor. They're using, I think, heating deuterium helium-3 in their process. So, why does CFS believe it is going to be the one to be the world's first for this endeavor for nuclear fusion?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think I would go all the way back to why was CFS founded? CFS was founded not to demonstrate a new way of doing fusion. CFS was founded to let's get commercial fusion power on the grid in the fastest, lowest risk way so that we can start deploying and scaling to actually bend the curve on climate. And how do you do that? Well, you do it in our sense, the approach we took is take the most scientifically proven approach, and that is basically a big magnetic donut called a tokamak, um, and use a new innovation, high temperature superconducting magnets, basically big, powerful magnets that allow you to shrink that device down to something that you can actually build and go finance and build power plants out of. So the first one, the most scientifically proven approach, there's been 150, over 150 tokamaks, these magnetic donuts that have been built before. So fusion has been happening the last 5, 6 decades. And the performance of fusion has actually been faster than Moore's law. The problem is the performance criteria is very hard, but we've scaled many orders of magnitude towards this magical moment where can you get more power out than in? And tokamaks, these magnetic donuts, were really right at the cusp of doing that. The problem is to build the one that would get you over the hump of getting more power out than in, you had to build it really big because magnets were only so strong. We came up, the second part, with a much stronger magnet, and we proved that back in 2021. That's what led to our 1.8 billion Series B. And if you have those big, strong magnets, you can take that device, shrink it down, and build a plant that you could finance and build. So that's our approach, the most scientifically proven approach with this key innovation. Put those two together, and we're on the fastest, surest path to commercial fusion power.
Now, I'm sure some other people are going to watch this and go, hmm? Because even I'm trying to make sure I follow that along. I did as much research as I could into it to because what you're saying is at least making the sense to some degree there. And I believe what you're trying to do in terms of your target right now, you're trying to generate, was it 400 megawatts of energy? So that's talking about maybe 150,000 households and maybe some industrial areas, right?
Yeah, so we're doing right now is we're building a pilot kind of a project outside of Boston, which we call Spark. Spark is the proof point that we'll get a lot more heat out than in to our kind of this fusion plant. That plant outside Boston won't be making electricity because taking something that's hot and running a steam cycle and then running a turbine and running making electricity, we've been doing that for a long time. That's not a risky thing. The real thing is like, can you prove that you're getting more heat out than in from this fusion reaction? That's what we're doing outside Boston right now. The arc plant, the next thing we build, will be the power plant that takes that as the core, makes it a little bit bigger, but then attaches a steam plant to it. And that will make, as you said, 400 megawatts of electric power, of net electric power. And that's what we're going to be siting in Chesterfield County, Virginia. We'll be the first fusion power plant of that large scale, 400 megawatts.
I got to ask, North Carolina, we're right below Virginia. I'm curious, why Chesterfield County, Virginia for this particular endeavor?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we were looking at siting our first power plant, it's been a long process. We've been very kind of diligent about it. It's been about a 2-year process where we've actually assessed literally hundreds of sites. We've walked a couple dozen sites and talked to owners of those sites. Why Chesterfield County, Virginia? Really, our Uber criteria was finding a place that we can move with speed and certainty in deploying a fusion power plant. The criteria underneath that, really, there's probably like three main things, like the physical site itself, kind of the social aspect and the partners to be working with is the second one. And the third one is really kind of customers and economics. So those three things are the main ones. But for a physical site, we just had to find a site that was, big enough and had enough supporting infrastructure that includes the transportation modes to get in there, like rail and water, both work in Chesterfield County. Has a proximity to a robust internet interconnection point for the grid. On the social and partner side, we really want to find a place that has a strong workforce that understands energy. Chesterfield County is fantastic for that. They have a great workforce. It's an energy community that understands it. We understand on the social aspect, we have to work with a local utility. So we have a partnership with Dominion so we can make that happen very well. And then obviously having support from state, county, local, who are all very supportive. We've had meetings with those folks. They understand now much more about what fusion is. They've committed to help us get this thing built. And then the third one was those customers and economics. Virginia is one of the states with the currently a very high demand for power and anticipated a large growth in energy demand, especially for clean, firm power. It's a place that has already identified they want to do that in a clean way. Those customers have high demand in this area. They want to do it in a clean way. And it's a location that's really focused on kind of clean, firm power.
Well, I mean, the way you describe it, it seems like it's the perfect, almost like sample size, if you're trying to actually scale up later, because I think the U.S. Census Bureau is putting like, I think 380,000-ish people that live in that area. That's a reasonable size, I think, to try this out. For the people, actually, before I jump into that question, you mentioned Boston a little bit. Massachusetts is important to your company because you guys are also working with MIT. I believe your company actually spun off from MIT and you're kind of working with them, collaborating on this. What's that been like trying to make this happen with such a prestigious name?
Yeah, well, it's been fantastic. I mean, we were born out of MIT. We spun out of MIT. We like to say we were born at scale, and the reason we say that is we have a very unique relationship with MIT where we've continued to collaborate. It wasn't like a university came up with something, spun it out to a company, and the company goes off and tries to commercialize it. We've maintained that very close relationship with MIT on some of the additional things that we continue to research and understand. We're one of the biggest supporters of private research at MIT. So this relationship has been very tight. And that's enabled us to actually stand up and move much faster than we otherwise would. And we've been great also. The state of Massachusetts has also been a great partner, as well as our local community, which is Devens, Massachusetts, which is about an hour west of Boston. The great thing about Fusion is the more people know about it, the more they turn into, at first it's usually inquisitive, like what is fusion? Is how different is it from fission? They quickly turn into, wow, that's really interesting. And then they turn into advocates, like, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? The state of Massachusetts has done that. Our local community in Devons has done that. We've now seen that starting to happen in Chesterfield County, Virginia. So Fusion has this unique ability, like it's has all these amazing attributes that the stakeholders that we work with, the partners we work with, really, when they learn about it, they really turn into like, how can we help you?
Well, and for the people who are not as savvy on the difference between nuclear fission versus nuclear fusion, I mean, what we currently have now is nuclear fission, right? But we also see that radioactive waste. There's the danger in that regard. But with fusion, yes, there is waste, but it's not as bad, and the payoff is a significant more amount of energy, correct?
Uh, that's right. I mean, a couple things. There's one fundamental, I mean, just a very fundamental difference. Fission is splitting apart a big atom into smaller ones, and then that ends up, that's a chain reaction that happens. Fusion is combining two small nuclei together, making a slightly bigger one. That's the process that happens in our sun and all the stars. So 99% of the energy, 99.99% of the energy that you ever experienced as a person on this planet comes from fusion, from our local fusion power plant, the sun. And so what we're doing is we're combining small bits into bigger ones versus splitting big ones into smaller ones. That fundamental difference also leads to very fundamental differences in how these plants would operate. For example, a fusion plant, to make fusion happen, you need to achieve these conditions. It needs to be very hot. You need to have the fuel dense enough, close enough around, and then you need to hold it together long enough that fusion happens. If you do those three things, fusion just happens. But the moment anything disrupts it, it just stops. Like there's no chain reaction. There's no, meltdown. It's impossible to have a meltdown. It's impossible. And so the safety features of a fusion plant can be it's a much safer thing. You don't have to put all these controls in it. And to the other one that you mentioned, the waste stream, fission has an issue where you have to use certain fuels, plutonium or uranium. Those fuels then result in other things that become issues, long-lived radioactive waste, high-level waste. We don't have those things. We have materials that will get activated by some of the neutrons, but it's like the kind of waste that would come from a particle accelerator or a medical facility that does radiotherapy. And so there's already methods to deal with that waste, and it's much different than the long-lived waste that's a proliferation risk that comes from fission. And the last thing is, you know, fusion is like, several million times more energy dense, like several million times more energy dense than burning something for energy. Fission is also like a million-ish times. Fusion's like 4 times better than fission in terms of energy density. So if you have, a fossil plant, you get like 4 to 10 million times more energy out of the mass from a fusion plant. And by the way, it also takes up a lot less space than if you were to pepper the land with solar panels and storage and wind, like somewhere between 300 to 800 times more energy dense from a land perspective. So it has all these advantages.
Well, you already touched on the point I was going to point out. Also, there's no meltdown there. I think it's a big selling point for a lot of people if there's no reaction that goes into it in that regard. For the people, because you touched on it a little bit about how there's some hardworking people that are in that area of Virginia. This is going to create jobs too, because we're talking about building the plant, but also it needs to be operated. It needs to be maintained.
That's correct. Yeah. And we're super excited. No matter where we put this first power plant, we knew this will be a hub for jobs and job creation. There certainly is the construction of the plant itself, but then once it's constructed, it does need to operate, and we'll have operators doing that. We've been very lucky to have done this in partnership with the state of Virginia and Chesterfield County, who are very supportive of moving this project forward. But also, even as part of the announcement, we announced the opportunity to also develop something like a fusion innovation hub, where we can actually have not just the workers for the plant, but develop a greater understanding and expertise of fusion to build out a future workforce. There's some innovation that can continue to happen. And this is not just on the technical side, it's also on the business side. How would you finance and deploy these plants? How would you, ensure that you've got the right opportunities for jobs with not only this project, but multiple projects? And there could be multiple projects in Virginia too. So it's actually a really interesting, area where we're actually thinking about what is the workforce. And in many cases, the workforce is similar to other power plants. Some of the exceptions will be we won't have someone who runs a boiler. We don't burn stuff, but we'll have someone who runs a cryogenic plant, like an LNG plant, because we need to keep very cold temperatures for our magnets. So there's some there's a little bit of a difference, but still similar jobs. We'll need pipe fitters, we'll need welders, we'll need constructors, all those things. So it's a great way of having people who've worked in energy in this local community take their skills and their expertise and apply them to this new innovation that could be like the energy source of the future.
And realistically, I mean, if obviously you're starting with this particular project first with ARC, but are we talking about maybe this scaling up, going beyond Virginia, maybe outside that area, West Virginia, the Midwest, et cetera? Or is this going to step at a time?
Uh, Absolutely. Our intention is never to build a single plant. Our intention is to build like literally thousands of these plants. That's the way we'll have an impact in delivering the kind of electricity that our that we need in the future for all the things that we want to do. Whether it's there's manufacturing, there's electrification of everything. There's clearly data centers and AI, but it's really electricity is the kind of the foundation of providing opportunity for economic opportunity, advancements, and even transportation and heating. Even we can provide heat, clean heat, even before we get to electricity. So the short answer is yes, we do see a lot of opportunities for expansion within Virginia, outside the U.S. I mean, one of the reason you'd mentioned asked earlier why Chesterfield County, Virginia. There's also a broader question: why the U.S.? There's two countries in the world today that have basically already agreed on here's how we would site fusion power plants. Here's how we would permit them. The U.S. and the U.K. The U.S. made this decision April of 23, so about a year and a half ago now, where they decided, hey, we'll regulate them not like fission plants, but like particle accelerators. That gave us the certainty to then move forward with confidence within the US, announce a site, and be able to get it permitted and built. And we'll have a much faster cycle of doing that than fission plants because the process is basically show that you can, manage the materials you have on site, kind of called a byproduct materials basis. Again, it's like a particle accelerator or a medical facility. And we know that this is quick because we already did that outside Boston. We've already done it. Like took about a year and a half, 2 years, a handful of $1 million instead of like 5 to 10 years and $1 billion for a fission plant. So if we build these things, we know we'll be able to deploy them many places quickly at scale.
Well, and I know that the president-elect Donald Trump, he was saying before, he wanted to make the United States establish us as an American energy dominance around the world. So, I mean, a lot of people would have their eyes on your company or another company, the other ones who are trying to create nuclear fusion. And I wonder with that, because it is a cleaner energy, that's the whole point, is to create cleaner energy and a massive amount of energy for people. But what would that mean for oil, gas, goodness, like natural gas, coal, etc.? Are we talking about just stepping away, starting that point of getting away from that?
It's a good question. Some people think that those things should go away immediately. The energy infrastructure is a massive. People have called the electricity grid the largest, most complex machine that mankind has ever built. It's a real-time delivery of energy from one place to another. Nothing else much rivals that. To shift that thing overnight is not realistic. It's not going to happen. But it is a good question. What happens when you have a fusion power plant that is providing electricity to customers in an affordable way? Affordable, obviously, the first one will probably be more expensive than anyone wants, but over time, there's a very clear path to providing affordable, clean power, and not just clean power when when the sun is shining, the wind is blowing, but clean power whenever you want it. You hit a button, it turns on. You hit a button, it turns off. So what happens when you're doing that and you're showing you can do it affordably? Well, we think that's going to be a massive opportunity to provide new generation for the new demand that's coming. As a lot of the fossil plants retire, their natural age is coming to a point where a lot of them are retiring in the US and around the world. Those are gas plants, coal plants. This will be a nice technology that can replace some of those. And by the way, reuse some of the existing infrastructure. Like we can still use all the electrical substation and transmission connection, like on those exact same sites, even. So there's a lot of transition that could happen. And those sources of electricity will probably shift over to these cleaner, firmer sources like a fusion power plant. You know, we'll probably still continue to use gas for peaking plants for some time. Coal, I don't know, as the capacity factors, the amount you use those plants actually decreases over time as renewables have become more penetrated. But a fusion power plant operates very well in high renewable penetration areas because it's fully dispatchable, meaning you can turn it on or off, you can ramp it up, you can ramp it down. A fusion power plant will look to the grid like a natural gas plant. You can turn it on, you can turn it off, you can ramp it up, you can ramp it down. The exception is there will be no fuel going in and no emissions coming out. So it'll be a natural replacement.
One of the reasons I asked that, one of my favorite shows is For All Mankind, and they address that in the show. They managed to mine helium-3 in like the early 2000s, but there was also this strike that was going on with the workers who work in the coal mines, who work on the oil rigs, etc. And so I wonder, has that been a discussion about what ramifications that would have around the world where we get our energy elsewhere, if this comes online and it's a hit?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting conversation because not only will it become like a new form of energy that could potentially supplant other forms or be used instead of other forms, it actually, because it it's kind of boggles the mind a little bit, but you're turning grams of material, literally grams of material, into gigawatts of power. So it's almost like you're manufacturing energy. That's how energy dense it is. That's why the universe decided, whatever, 10 billion years ago, like fusion is the source that it will use to energize everything. What it does is, in effect, it gives communities, states, countries ownership of their own energy infrastructure. Like, think about all the countries in the world today that don't have, aren't blessed with natural resources, whether it be coal or gas or what have to import all that. If they build a fusion power plant, they need fuel for that. Where does that fuel come from? It's filtered seawater. That's basically available everywhere. It's limitless, basically, in terms of the amount of power that could provide through fusion power plants. And a country can site a fusion power plant and own its own energy with no imports. It becomes a way of owning your own energy. Fusion is not tied to any fraught political politically fraught supply chain. So not only is it clean, dispatchable, scalable, citable anywhere. It's also you own it. Like you have no connection. So it could be a massive shift.
I'm going to wager folks in Texas may like that. They're on their own power grid down there. So,
Yep.
if something goes on there, I wonder how they would react to using something like that. In current events, AI has obviously become very popular, but AI also uses a lot of power, even more so than data centers, if I'm not mistaken. This could be a good thing, some people may say, for AI, because it would be energy that could support these computers that make it happen and make it a reality.
That's right. When we think about who are the customers for Fusion Power, it's really any large power user that wants clean, firm power that they can call on when they need it, not just when it happens to be available. And so, certainly, data center operators, which include those who are now pursuing AI, which basically is another form of data center that they would be building, is certainly a user group. There's also those large energy users who are, manufacturers. They want to keep a manufacturing plant running. Any downtime on the manufacturing plant doesn't make economic sense for them. There's metals manufacturers who use a lot of energy to make those metals. There's also just transportation, now that we're electrifying our transportation system, providing power to that. But fusion also provides not only clean electricity, but clean heat and power. There's a bunch of applications for that. Think about desalination, making fresh water from salt water. Like, fusion can help enable that to happen. If you want to do direct air capture of carbon, you can use the heat and electricity. If you wanted to make green hydrogen, you could do that with fusion too. There's a whole lot of things you can do if you had clean, firm power, which is what fusion could provide. So we see like enormous opportunities. AI is certainly one of those, and some people have claimed that there's a potentially massive inflection in demand for AI. We'll see how that actually pans out. We think it'll be pretty large. But we know that people will find better chips, find better algorithms, do better training, all those things that they'll try to mediate that increase, but it will still be large. And fusion is like just the most, ideally fit kind of power source for that. You mentioned reading that book. The funny thing about fusion, if you read any science fiction or you watch a science fiction series or movie, they all have one thing in common, which is if you look out like 20 years in the future, what do they all have in common? Humans have mastered fusion. Like,
Yeah.
and that's because it's not just, a great power source. It's not like the next power source. It is the final one. Like if you master fusion, like that's that's it. I mean, there's nothing, the only thing that will beat a future fusion power plant is a better fusion power plant. So this is the last step in humans' evolution with energy, and we're happy to like try and be the first one to make that happen.
And to make that happen, I believe you're targeting early 2030s, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. That's when we anticipate that first power plant in Chesterfield County will come online, early 2030s.
And I think some people predict it wouldn't be until the 2050s until we saw this. But you folks seem very positive that no, 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 it's going to happen early 2030s.
Yeah, it's funny. People have been used to hearing that fusion is far away. I would, I would suggest maybe thinking about how have people thought about renewables, right? There are probably people today that if you asked about, hey, what about more solar power? Some might still say, well, that's an expensive form of power. It is not. It is the cheapest form of power today. But people still say that. And that's because it's been ingrained in their head for generations, actually. I'd say the same thing has been happening with fusion, where people have just always thought that's so far away. And to be fair, there are technical challenges and technical hurdles to be overcome. But yeah, like 2 years ago, December 2022, the National Ignition Facility out here in California basically showed that humans can achieve more heat out than in for a fusion reaction. First time in human history. It wasn't in the commercially relevant architecture, but we've proven we can do that. We can achieve those conditions on Earth. Now we're going to show that we can achieve those conditions on Earth in a very commercially relevant architecture from which you could extract heat, run a steam turbine, and make electricity. So people have always said, "Oh, fusion's far away." But as I said earlier, the progress, the technical progress, has been actually faster than Moore's law, which said basically you get a doubling of computing capacity every year as miniaturization happened. Like we've been moving faster than that, and we're now at the cusp of commercial power. And why? Because we have things like a better understanding of materials, like for us, the tape that we use for our high temperature superconducting magnets. But there's also been better AI and understanding of better supercomputing that can better run these models for how to operate a plasma. There's been advancements in designs and architecture. So there's been so many advancements that have now gotten us to the point we have a bunch of shots on goal for commercial fusion. There's over 40 fusion companies. We do think we'll be the first one to have a grid scale power plant, but we're also excited about all the other shots that are happening. And by the way, there's plenty of room for many winners here. We're talking a multi-trillion-dollar market. So, and we have a climate that doesn't wait. So we're excited about others too.
Just two last points here as we wrap up. One thing that stood out to me also is that you're not asking for public investment on this. CFS is funding this. You're funding this. You're building this. This is, to me, when I hear that, that sounds like a company that it feels very confident in what it's doing.
Well, we feel very confident, but as I just mentioned in the last comment, like climate's not waiting, right? We can decide to do things that some might perceive as risky, which is like move ahead and commit to financing this ourselves if we're not able to raise the other capital that we would need. We think we'll be able to raise the capital as a company to go do this. We're always going to be looking for more efficient forms of capital, understanding our capital stack to get those first plants built, and then our second, third, fourth, and fifth. But to be fair, like some would say, well, moving that fast and doing it all in your, financing it all on your own is pretty risky. Well, we'd flip the question around and say, what's the risk of waiting? What's the risk of waiting? And let's get this just right. Let's make sure the next one is an evolution from our first one. And now you're into the 2050s, as you mentioned, and you've got a few plants deployed. Well, how is that helping climate? It's not. It frankly isn't. So what we've decided to do is let's take some of those risks so that we can move faster. And our investors, and we owe a lot of credit to our investors for having faith in us and to do this, they also agree. Let's move fast. Let's provide a real solution for climate, not in the 2050s, in the 2030s. So we can actually get these things on the grid. They can actually have an impact. They can start bending the curve on climate like sooner than you think. So one of the common educational challenges we have is the question you'd ask, like fusion, isn't that so far away? We hope that people walk away from some of these announcements and from what we talk about and we publish our papers. It's coming sooner than you think. And you could be the person, like the person who thinks solar is expensive and is just flat out wrong. Or you can say, hey, maybe I should take a look at this. And that's what state of Virginia is doing. That's what Dominion Energy is doing. They're taking a look at it and they said, this looks real. This is happening. Let's be involved.
Lastly, I like to think that I can read people pretty well. Your tone, your diction, your mannerisms, even when you think you're looking up and you're reaching up, it's almost like you're reaching into like the future. It's already there. What is your dream for this? Because I can tell you're excited about it, but I see you have a vision in your mind.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I mean, our vision, I'd say, is collectively across the company. Our vision is to get this first fusion power plant deployed, but not just that, set ourselves up so that we can deploy multiple fusion power plants, have it become a solution that is viable, that is, it's certainly all those things naturally clean, safe. Those things are just naturally what it is, but we got to make sure it's scalable, it's affordable. And we think there's clearly challenges to do, but we are set up as a team that's already overcome a bunch of technical challenges that have proven our chops in doing that. We have a team that's beyond just the technical expertise in building a fusion power plant. We have people who come from, the world's companies are best known for doing amazing things. Some of our people come from Tesla and SpaceX, Google, but also from people companies that have built lots of things, from BMW, Harley Davidson, Boeing, Ford. Like we have a company that's been built to go take on this challenge. We recognize it's a big challenge, but the opportunity is so massive that I think if we polled people across our company, the excitement level is so high in actually being able to deliver this first fusion power plant. And then again, not just that first one, but setting ourselves up to deliver many after that.
Rick Needham, Chief Commercial Officer for Commonwealth Fusion Systems. Again, you're trying to be the world's first grid scale nuclear fusion plant. This would be a big thing to have happen, and I think a lot of people are going to have their eyes on you in the next couple of years.
Super. Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate the opportunity.